In October 2018, a 26-year-old filmmaker working in the remote mountains of Idaho suddenly dropped his equipment and sprinted into the wilderness without saying a word. 6 days later, his body was found miles downstream, but the circumstances surrounding his death have left investigators and his family with more questions than answers. This is the case of Terrence Woods Jr. Hey everyone, welcome back to Hikeys. Today we're diving into a case that's as mysterious as it is tragic. A young man at the start of his career, working on what should have been just another production job, vanished in the most bizarre way possible. And the more you look into it, the less sense it makes. So, let's break down what happened, what we know, and what still doesn't add up. Terrence Woods Jr. was born in 1991 and grew up in Maryland. He was creative, driven, and passionate about film and television production. After graduating from high school, he studied at the University of Maryland, where he developed his skills behind the camera. Terrence wasn't just trying to break into the industry, he was actively building a career. He worked as a freelance production assistant, taking gigs wherever he could, learning the ropes, and putting in the work. By 2018, Terrence had accumulated a solid resume. He'd worked on various projects, everything from small independent productions to larger network jobs. He was known among colleagues as reliable, professional, and eager to grow. His family described him as level-headed, someone who knew what he wanted and was willing to work hard to get there. He had plans, ambitions, and a future that seemed bright. In early October 2018, Terrence accepted a job that would take him far from home. He was hired as a production assistant for a documentary series called Gold Fever, which was being produced for the Discovery Channel. The show focused on modern-day gold mining operations, and the crew was heading to one of the most remote areas of Idaho to film. For Terrence, it was just another gig, another opportunity to gain experience and make connections in the industry. He packed his bags, said goodbye to his family, and flew out to Idaho. The production was set up in the Salmon-Challis National Forest, specifically near the Penman Mine area in central Idaho. If you've never been to this part of the country, it's about as isolated as it gets. We're talking rugged mountain terrain, dense forests, steep cliffs, and virtually no infrastructure. The nearest town, Challis, was miles away, and even that's a small community with limited resources. Cell phone service in the area was non-existent. If something went wrong out there, help wasn't close. The crew was staying in a small, makeshift camp near the filming location. Conditions were basic, the kind of setup you'd expect for a remote documentary shoot. The days were long, the work was physical, and the environment was challenging. But for someone like Terrence, who'd worked on various productions before, this was all part of the job. He arrived on the set on October 1st, 2018. Everything seemed fine. He was doing his job, getting along with the crew, adjusting to the remote conditions. There were no reports of conflicts, no signs of distress. According to those who worked with him those first few days, Terrence seemed like his usual self, maybe a bit quiet, but nothing that raised any alarms. 5 days into the shoot, on Friday, October 5th, the crew was filming at a location overlooking a steep, heavily forested ravine. It was late afternoon, around 5:30 p.m. The light was starting to fade, and the crew was wrapping up the day's work. Terrence was on set, handling equipment and assisting with the shoot like he'd been doing all week. Then, without any warning, Terrence dropped everything he was holding and ran. Not a casual jog, a full sprint. He took off down the embankment, crashing through the underbrush and trees, heading straight down into the ravine. The terrain he ran into was treacherous, a steep drop of several hundred feet, covered in dense vegetation, rocks, and deadfall. This wasn't a path or a trail. This was raw wilderness. The crew was stunned. They started yelling after him, calling his name, trying to get him to stop. A few crew members attempted to follow, but the terrain was too dangerous and Terrence was moving too fast. Within moments, he disappeared into the forest below. The whole thing happened so quickly that nobody had time to process what they were seeing. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. The crew immediately tried to figure out what to do. They searched the immediate area, calling out for Terrence, but there was no response. As the sun began to set, they realized they needed professional help. They contacted local authorities, and by that evening, a search and rescue operation was underway. The search for Terrence Woods Jr. was extensive. Local law enforcement, Search and rescue teams and volunteers from the area all participated. Given the remote location and difficult terrain, helicopters were brought in to search from the air. Ground teams combed through the forest, and search dogs were deployed to try to pick up his scent. But the area was vast, and the conditions were brutal. The forest was thick, visibility was limited, and the terrain was dangerous even for experienced searchers. Days passed with no sign of Terrence. The search radius expanded, covering miles of wilderness. His family back in Maryland was frantic. They flew out to Idaho to be closer to the search efforts, desperate for any news. The production company issued statements expressing concern and cooperation with authorities, but details about what exactly happened on set that day remained vague. On October 11th, 6 days after Terrence disappeared, 2 rafters were navigating the Salmon River, which runs through the area. They spotted something on the riverbank and pulled over to investigate. It was a body. It was Terrence Woods Jr. He was found approximately 6 miles downstream from where he'd run off. The location was remote, accessible primarily by the river. His body showed signs of significant trauma consistent with a fall from height and exposure to the elements. But there were things that didn't make sense. His personal belongings, his phone, his wallet were missing. The exact cause of death wasn't immediately clear, and the circumstances raised more questions than they answered. The initial investigation by local authorities in Idaho concluded that Terrence's death was accidental. The working theory was that he had suffered some kind of acute psychological episode, ran down the embankment, fell, and sustained fatal injuries. The rugged terrain and remote location meant that even if he'd survived the initial fall, his chances of survival were slim. The official report closed the case as an accidental death, but Terrence's family wasn't satisfied with that explanation, not even close. His father, Terrence Woods Sr., immediately began asking questions. He couldn't reconcile the son he knew with the story he was being told. Terrence wasn't someone who acted impulsively or recklessly. He wasn't suicidal. He had no history of mental health crises. The idea that he would suddenly, without any warning or explanation, run into the wilderness made no sense to those who knew him best. Terrence Sr. hired private investigators to look into the case. He started reaching out to the production crew, trying to piece together what happened in the hours and days leading up to his son's disappearance. And the more he dug, the more inconsistencies he found. Crew members gave varying accounts of Terrence's behavior that day. Some said he seemed normal. Others mentioned he seemed distracted or quieter than usual, but nobody could explain why he ran. One detail that stood out to the family was a text message. The night before he disappeared, on October 4th, Terrence sent a message to his father. He said he had something important to tell him when he got back home. He didn't elaborate. He didn't say what it was about, and he never got the chance to explain. Terrence Woods Sr. hasn't stopped fighting for the truth. He's given numerous interviews, appeared on podcasts, and worked with journalists to keep his son's case in the public eye. In 2021, the Investigate Ion Discovery Channel featured Terrence's case in their series Disappeared, bringing renewed attention to the circumstances of his death. The episode highlighted the unanswered questions and the family's frustration with the official narrative. The Woods family has maintained that they're not looking to assign blame without evidence, but they want a thorough, transparent investigation. They want to know what happened in the hours before Terrence ran. They want to understand why he ran. They want closure, and they want the truth, whatever that truth may be. The case remains officially closed as an accidental death, but the family considers it an open question. They've called for additional investigation, for more transparency from the production company, and for anyone with information to come forward. That's the story of Terrence Woods Jr., a talented young filmmaker whose life ended in the most mysterious and tragic way. If you've heard about this case, or have thoughts on what might have happened, let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into cases like this, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.